On the morning of May 23, 1901, an anonymous letter arrived at the desk of the Attorney General of Paris. It was brief, its author unknown, and its contents so extraordinary that the official who read it could hardly believe what it described. The letter claimed that somewhere in the respectable city of Poitiers, in the home of one of its most admired families, a woman had been held prisoner for more than 2 decades. The letter read, quote, "Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved and living on a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth." It sounded like the ravings of a crackpot, a crank, a malicious neighbor settling scores. But the Attorney General ordered an investigation nonetheless, and within hours of the police arriving at 21 Rue de la Visitation, the people of France would discover that not only was every word of the letter true, but that the truth was far worse than anyone had imagined. This is Monsters. The Monniers were a family of standing in Poitiers, a cathedral city in west-central France with a quiet dignity and a long memory. Charles-Émile Monnier had been the head of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Poitiers, a man of civic esteem. His wife Louise, known in the community as Madame Monnier, was regarded as a pillar of the local society, a woman of charitable impulse and irreproachable character. She had twice received a Medal of Honor for her good works. The family occupied a substantial townhouse on Rue de la Visitation, and they moved in the circles of the educated, propertied bourgeoisie. They had 2 children, a son Marcel and a daughter Blanche. Blanche Monnier was born in 1849. By the accounts of those who remembered her from her early years, she was charming, vivacious, and lovely, a young woman of considerable appeal. She attracted a number of suitors, and being from a family of prominence, she was expected to marry a man of similar status. Blanche, however, wanted to marry a man named Victor Calmet, who was a lawyer but not one who commanded a high price. There were multiple stories as to why he was unsuitable. Some sources describe him as a lawyer of modest means, others as an older man, but the essential detail is the same. Madame Monnier disapproved. Blanche refused to give him up, though, so the story goes her mother decided that if Blanche would not conform, she would simply cease to exist. The exact date Blanche was locked away is not documented with certainty, but it is generally believed to have been around 1876, when she was approximately 25 years old. The man she loved eventually died, with some accounts saying he passed away in the 1880s, but still Blanche wasn't released. The original pretext, if there was one, had dissolved, but by then perhaps there was no going back. To release her would have meant they needed to explain her absence and shatter the image they wanted to maintain in the first place. So Blanche stayed in the room. For 25 years the world continued outside the shuttered windows of the townhouse. France lost a war with Prussia, gained a republic, built the Eiffel Tower, entered the age of electricity, cinema, and the automobile. In Poitiers, Madame Monnier attended charitable functions, accepted honors, and maintained her reputation. Her son Marcel became a successful attorney. The house remained respectable, and somewhere in the darkness above, Blanche Monnier lay in her own filth, fed only scraps, growing thinner and stranger and more broken with every passing year. When the police arrived at the Monnier residence on May 23, 1901, following the anonymous tip, they were met with the family's customary propriety. Nothing seemed amiss. The house was furnished and maintained as one would expect of a family of their class, but the investigators insisted on searching every room. They were eventually led to a room on the upper floor. The smell reached them before they opened the door. The account left by the chief of police, preserved in historical records, described what they found in terms that remain shocking even by modern standards. The room was in almost total darkness. The single window was shuttered and nailed shut. The air inside was an almost physical thing, a dense, suffocating stench of decay, excrement, and rot. On a bed, if it could still be called that, lay a woman. She was 52 years old. She weighed approximately 55 pounds or 25 kilograms. She was naked, lying on a mattress that had become a putrefied mass of years of accumulated waste, rotting food scraps, insects, vermin droppings. The straw of the mattress had long since composted into something unrecognizable. Around her were the remnants of meals delivered through the years. Bones, scraps, the detritus of a life sustained at the bare minimum necessary for breath to continue. And yet Blanche Monnier was alive. She was shockingly thin, barely more than a skeleton draped in skin, but alive. And when the police opened the shutters and let in the light of a May morning, she reportedly reacted with fear and distress, covering her eyes against a brightness she had not experienced in a quarter of a century. A photograph was taken, a document that would become one of the most disturbing images in French legal history, reproduced in newspapers and still examined today. It shows a gaunt, barely human figure, her eyes wide, her body wasting to near nothing. It's difficult to look at and impossible to forget. What followed was a national sensation. France was transfixed, horrified, and hungry for answers. How could this have happened? How could a woman be imprisoned for 25 years in the middle of a city, in a respectable home, in plain sight of society, and no one knew? Madame Monnier was arrested. She was 75 years old and she quickly fell ill. 15 days after her arrest, she was dead. It was reported that the shock and exposure proved too much for her age. She never faced trial and she never explained herself. Whatever reasoning, justification, or self-delusion had sustained her through a quarter-century of the arrangement died with her. Marcel Monnier, the son and lawyer, was also arrested and charged with complicity. His case was more complicated, though. The defense argued that as a minor living in his mother's household when the imprisonment began, and as a man subsequently dominated by a powerful matriarch, his culpability was different in kind from hers. He was convicted of complicity and unlawful sequestration and sentenced to 15 months in prison. He appealed, and the Court of Cassation, France's highest court, overturned the conviction on technical legal grounds, ruling that the charge as applied to him was unsustainable. He was released, but the outcome struck many people as deeply inadequate, and Marcel spent the remainder of his life under a cloud of public contempt, his legal career destroyed. He died in June of 1913. The anonymous letter writer was never conclusively identified. Blanche was taken to Hôtel Dieu Hospital in Poitiers, where physicians began the long, uncertain work of attempting to restore her to something approaching health. Physically, she was in catastrophic condition. 25 years of malnutrition, immobility, and sensory deprivation had left permanent damage. She was dangerously underweight. Her muscles had atrophied. Her eyes had long been accustomed to darkness, but the damage that proved most lasting was not physical. Blanche's mind had not survived its imprisonment intact. She had entered the room a young woman of 25 in possession of her faculties, but she emerged decades later profoundly disturbed. Contemporary accounts describe her behavior in the hospital as erratic, childlike, and at times frantic. She had spent so many years in isolation, in silence, in darkness, that the ordinary world, noise, people, light, interaction had become overwhelming and strange. She never fully recovered and spent the rest of her life in psychiatric care, moving through various institutions. She died on October 13, 1913, at the age of 64 in the Blois Asylum. She had spent the final 12 years of her life outside her prison room, and they had not been years of restoration. They had been years of continued, if differently shaped, suffering. She outlived both her imprisoners, but did not outlive the damage they had done. Questions were raised as to who else knew about Blanche's imprisonment. A household of that era and class had domestic staff. Meals were brought to the room with the food scraps found amidst the filth making that clear. Someone cooked them. Someone carried them up the stairs. Someone knew. Did they fear Madame Monnier? Did they believe at some level that it was a family matter in which servants did not intervene? Were they complicit or coerced, or both? Their testimony at the time was limited, and history hasn't preserved their inner lives. It was reported that, as police entered the property on May 23, 1901, a butler had attempted to turn them away but was unsuccessful. Was he just being the gatekeeper for his wealthy employer, or did he actively want to keep them from finding Blanche? It's hard to say during a time when servants didn't ask questions. It was also a time when they might not have believed there were any questions to ask. Young women's lives were tied to who their husband would be, and a powerful parent would be heavily involved in their daughter's choice of husband. With a daughter's future husband a significant part of her family's image, their desire to marry the wrong man could be met with severe consequences. The family's staff would likely not be in a position to question that. Blanche Monnier wanted nothing more than to marry the person she loved, something many people today can relate to. Unfortunately, her mother didn't think love was enough. She wanted Blanche to marry for money, power, status, and that was because those things would benefit her instead of Blanche. For that crime, Blanche was banished to a dark room essentially forever. Louise Monnier was a monster who would have never released her on her own, but even though she eventually was, she never got her life back. After gaining freedom, Blanche asked nothing of history. She had no opportunity to write her account, to advocate for herself, to shape how her story would be remembered. She lived and suffered and died largely outside the reach of her own narrative. What we know of her comes from police reports, medical records, newspaper accounts, the documentation of her as a case, not as a person. But she was a person, and her story, more than a century later, continues to demand that we remember that. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases in criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.